From MNT-EC, the Micro Nano Technology Education Center, and JATE, the Journal of Advanced Technological Education, welcome to the JATE Writer Studio. In each one of these sessions, we'll have a guided conversation with a published author, and we highlight authors who publish articles in peer-reviewed journals, just like JATE. We want these authors to be able to share their stories and their writing process with you. And we want to give authors a voice to share their tips and tricks about how to write peer-reviewed journal articles. Today, I'm pleased to introduce TJ McCue. TJ is a digital media expert at Refined Digital and helps organizations with their digital content. And today we'll discuss TJ's article in JATE, which is titled Results and Discussion of 2 Years of the Talking Technicians podcast. TJ, welcome and thanks for being with us today.
Yeah, terrific to be here, Peter. Thanks for inviting me.
So TJ, before we talk about writing the article, I'd like to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself to everybody and describe where you live and work and chat a little bit about your background. And then also as a media professional, how you engage with technical education at community colleges.
Wow. I don't even know if I can remember from where you got going there, but briefly, I mostly just tell people I'm a writer because when I explain the marketing and other aspects of what I do with high-tech companies and with or just tech companies and with NSF, they usually just cross their eyes and look at me funny and say, okay, great. So I don't usually spend a lot of time explaining it, but I do a lot of marketing work for, the HPs and Samsungs of the world. And then I also have been thrilled to work with NSF projects for the last, 8 or 10 years. And so, but that also includes some time where I've written for a variety of media places, the Wall Street Journal being the biggest one, and then Forbes, the next biggest, depending on your perspective. Those places might be, prestigious or they might be total rags. So depending on how you look at things in the digital media world today, with all the ads and things that pop up all the time and drive you crazy. So I don't know that I answered all the things you just asked me.
So you've got a big, extensive writing background, both in newspapers, magazines, and other types of digital media, like blog posts and things like that. Could you real briefly just describe the article that we're discussing, just like a couple sentences, and then we'll get more into the details of the article later?
Sure. I wouldn't look at it as a case study, but it certainly has that sort of feel to it of saying, here's what we did for the last couple of years with Talking Technicians. And, obviously you are the major leader in that and handle all the heavy work, you and Janet. I've been able to work on some of the measurement and some of the pieces that we keep track of for, the distribution of that and where it goes and kind of impacts it has.
So the Talking Technicians podcast has been going on for a little over 2 years. Why do you think that that's a good idea for a peer-reviewed journal article? Where did that kind of idea come from, that we've been doing this activity, but we should also write a peer-reviewed journal article on it?
I think it stems from the fact that there's a lot of people who are trying to get traction to their content. And if you just keep staying in the same place, if we look at it as just newspapers and magazines as being the heritage of how you communicate with the public, then you miss all the cool ways that you can reach people today. So I think a podcast is just obviously the trends in them are huge in terms of growth, and maybe not individual ones, but lots of attention to podcasts in the world of outreach and marketing.
TJ, can you describe a little bit about the other co-authors? Because you mentioned me that worked on the article. What did the different co-authors bring to the writing of this journal article?
Well, there was you, me, and Billy Copley. And I think Billy had some overlap with me in terms of what was happening in various data that we were collecting from the project, from the podcast, and we were both sort of tag teaming because there seemed to be a lot of data between the website, the podcast platform itself, the use of social media, and the use of our blog to sort of share that, as well as the channels that you automatically do. I think it was just a divvying up of the work to handle the analytics sort of portion. And Billy had insights into a lot of the people who are engaging with us in the MinTech community. And I think lent a lot of credibility to how that was happening and where people were paying attention to us.
So TJ, you mentioned that some of your expertise is being able to have the data through platforms like YouTube or other metrics. How did you know that there was enough data to be able to write a journal article? Because sometimes folks feel like their investigation hasn't gone on for long enough, or they haven't done enough yet to be able to publish. How did you know that you had enough to be able to publish a peer-reviewed journal article?
Oh, that's a great point, Peter. I think there's folks who might still feel that way, right? Only a couple of years in the game. But we get such granular detail of what people are doing from, anything where we can track digitally, right? So from the website analytics to the podcast platform itself giving us analytics. So, I mean, yes, there might be only, 500 people or 1,000 people who have spent time with it, but we get data points on those people. We find out where they clicked, where they went. So I don't know that your sample size, your data set has to be enormous in order to sort of pull out good learning as well as extrapolate out directions that people want us to go in. So I think the decision was mainly, I mean, you've built enough traction with it and enough viewers, listeners, readers, even, for the folks who just scan the transcript to be able to say, okay, well, we have enough data to say this is working. People are sharing it. It's driving traffic to the website and all of those where they interact.
Mm-hmm. So TJ, let's talk a little bit about the construction of the paper now. How was the paper written? Did it go just top to bottom? Were there different sections and those were worked on at different times? What was the writing process between the co-authors to create this?
Yeah, so I mean, I gotta say that I normally will outline and structure in just a fast data dump. In this case, you did that heavy share of the heavy lifting, Peter. So you did this tremendous outline that Billy and I could just plug into. There are lots of times for me where, depending on the concept of the piece, whether it's a white paper, a case study, just a blog post, I will often just dump down a ton of thoughts, in just sort of a stream of consciousness sort of way before I outline, and then the outline is sort of embedded in there. And I do that in my own process because I find that if I spend too much time trying to make it just right, then I edit before I even get to write or share anything creative. So I've stopped doing my more formal outlines to start, but I get to them within usually like 15 minutes. And then I find that I'm tearing the main points out as I do all this stream of consciousness writing. Then I'm throwing down the bullet points and they come together. The fact that you did it in this case made it, one step easier because then you could just dial into the section that you knew you were going to work on first, and write just whatever was coming to mind and pulling those data points in. Related to that, I don't actually always go in order. I mean, we definitely had an order that we were going to go in, and I will oftentimes just pick the one that motivates me the most to get started versus saying, oh, I have to start at the beginning, because you can come around to that. That's, at least for me, I don't have to start. And I have lots of friends and, colleagues who will be like, no, I have to start at the beginning. Otherwise, and I guess that's maybe a journalism thing. I often will either start wherever I'm motivated, or I will specifically try to start with a conclusion. And that's because editors in my early newspaper days would chop off the entire top and just take the bottom and drag it up and say, well, you rattled on, you prattled on for like a good 20 minutes here. and the bottom point is really the only point that's meaningful. So why don't we rip everything else apart, put that at the top, and then start over? I'm like, yeah, I really don't like that idea, because that's like, now I have twice the work. But their point was a good one, so I can blather on for a long time, as I'm doing right now, and then I get to the final end point, which is just write in the order that makes sense for you. But I love the fact that you gave us an outline from your perspective, and I think we wound up shifting that outline quite a bit, moving things around.
TJ, coming from an experience of writing in many different areas, like magazines and online and newspapers and stuff like that, how was this peer-reviewed journal article writing different than it was in those types of media?
Yeah, that's interesting, because normally I don't feel that intimidated by writing. I just, dump down whatever I think, and then keep refining it. And I view it as sort of a very iterative thing, even after you've published today, just because of the means of digital. But a lot of folks don't agree with that sentiment, and a lot of formats don't allow for it, right? So the journal is certainly more formal, and has the peer review process, I think, is terrific. It can be a little bit challenging, because the person who's reviewing your work might have the technical chops, might not have the sort of narrative flow chops, if you will, right? I mean, my wife likes to call it a thread. Does your piece have a thread that people can flow through? And there's, I think, plenty of things and no diss, I've worked on other peer-reviewed projects and articles with other people at other journals, in other years, and we can go so deep and so detailed that we sometimes lose that ability to keep people hooked and have a thread. And it takes you're only going to then appeal to a certain audience. So I think it changes how you approach the writing, to know that you have somebody who's going to peer review it. So you're writing at a little bit higher, level of, a standard. But I think it would be important, like in our process as we go through things, to I guess try to keep people from being intimidated by that process, by that fact that somebody else is going to be looking at it and scrutinizing it. And it can be even more harsh than a standard editor. And I've had editors say pretty hard things to me. So, and by the way, I mean, it's like, I've written for some great places, but I still look at myself as a very average writer. And the best stuff that I've ever written has been handled by an editor who just has way better sense of how to share that with a reader.
So TJ, we've talked a little bit about peer review. Let's briefly go over the submission process. So once the article was done, the manuscript along with a cover letter was submitted, and you were also instrumental in suggesting some peer reviewers. Can you talk about suggested reviewers and how that was kind of different in this case for this article?
Yeah, I think one of the nice things about what JATE does is it's not just academic, right? So it doesn't have to be a professor or a department head or somebody else. It can be somebody from industry who has experience in that area. And I think that you have probably a wide range of people, within the JATE community they're not full-time professors, they're not full-time educators, maybe they're in a research lab. So you could have a different group looking at a piece versus the standard. I don't know that everybody's tenured in the mix of editors here, but you have a standard group that is going to approach it from the academic side, from the educational institution side. And in this case, we asked a couple of industry people who had a lot of podcast and/or, I guess you'd say, digital media experience. And those people brought, just sort of street cred to the process, right? Because they're like, is that actually true? Because I don't know if that's true about podcasts. Or did you think about how this platform would work? And where did that data come from? And, I need more data there. Or I was not as interested in this data point. So it got pretty particular, which is one of those things where people are like, hey, can you tell me a lot more about this? And it's like, well, I don't know that that's important from your or my perspective for the reader, but that reviewer thought it was, which enhanced the piece.
TJ, how'd the reviews make you feel? And then what did the writing team do once the reviews were received?
I guess I'll take that in reverse order. We
Mhm.
definitely took the feedback and said, we're going to make changes that would be responsive to what that person has said. And then I think there are other points where we're like, what's that have to do with anything? Is that really relevant? And in some cases, I think, debated a little bit, with the reviewer, gently to say, this is the way we go. I don't know. I mean, I guess a reviewer can totally squash the piece. I hadn't thought about it from that perspective. Although I would still rather stand, with some integrity to say, no, I believe this is important versus to say, oh, well, that's what you want. That's what we'll give you. And that has nothing to do. I mean, obviously we don't know who the reviewers were, I like that part of it, and considering that I don't know who was chosen out of the list of names, some of these people might actually be people that I know in industry. So I'd be like, okay, it's good I don't know that you said that because I might then say something to you later because, that jab hurt a little bit, of this was useless or why did you say that? Or, I mean, it's mostly those sorts of comments where, um, and maybe that's the whole anonymity thing that happens in social media. You feel able to say something very bluntly that you might not say that way if you're in person.
Huh. That's an interesting sort of thread to think about. So ultimately, once the manuscript was edited, then it was resubmitted with a rebuttal letter. And in that letter, the authors talked about which things they thought were important to change and which things that they thought were important to either keep in there or not add that the reviewers have added. So that's kind of a good purpose of that rebuttal letter, is the communication between the writers, the reviewers, and that corresponding author. The other thing that the writers did was make sure to submit both a finished manuscript and one that track changes were turned on. And what that gives is an opportunity for the corresponding editor to see directly what changes were made. And that can also sometimes be helpful in the peer-reviewed process. And then they can correspond those changes with what was noted in the rebuttal letter from the track changes version.
Right.
So
Right.
TJ, what advice would you give to new writers, or kind of more in your case, to new writers to peer-reviewed journals if they have experience writing in other areas? Maybe it's curriculum design, or maybe it's blog posts. What would you tell those authors about their first peer-reviewed journal article?
I guess it would be to go and read a bunch of journal articles. Maybe that's the standard advice. But I've always felt that you can't write something if you haven't read it. If you haven't read how it's done, how people share, um, then you're not going to be good at it. I mean, I think that's like advice that you get in fiction writing and in things that are short story oriented. It's like, oh, read the masters, and then that'll help flow into what you're doing. But I think the same thing applies in formal journal writing. To read a bunch of, I mean, maybe not the super scientific ones that I mean, I think JAT has some of that, right, where people are sharing thoughts that are in a um, more technical bend. So you want to see how that's formatted, but I think just the essence of, oh, how do people approach this, how did they communicate, how did they speak to their audience? I think those things take the edge off of that intimidation factor, which, since you've had a number of students come through and also be involved in the or even, if you think about it, right? I mean, you've said before, I mean, this is one of the reasons for the publication is not as many community college professors, submit to professional journals or to academic journals. So I think it gives them a sense. So maybe they're coming at it in the same sort of mindset as a younger student of, I've not done this. How do I do it? And I think to me, that's what I spend time with. I didn't just read JATE articles. I went out and just read a few other types, so a chemistry journal, and um, there were a couple of others to refresh my thinking. And because I live in a marketing world, most of the time, the other peer-reviewed ones I've been part of have been marketing, communication, organizational behavior sorts of journals, and those have people like me who just talk too much, right? So you can easily get you could write those because it's very similar, right? But this one's more, it definitely has a more scientific, technical detail edge.
Thanks, TJ. So I think now we'll kind of move on and see if any folks have other questions for you. Let's start with one in the chat from Janet. Did the audience you were writing for impact your writing choices as compared to the audiences that you've professionally wrote for before?
I would say yes and no, but that's because I had you as sort of backup. if I didn't have you as backup, then I probably would have had to, dwelled more with the audience and thinking about their perspective. I mean, I certainly feel like you can write a blog post that could become a journal article. There's plenty of in-depth, very specific, highly technical, blog posts out there that could fit that bill. And so I think there's this sense of you have to change everything you do about how you write. And I don't think that's the case. I don't think it has to be. And honestly, there's certain parts that have to be, but there's also places where you can just be who you are and write the way you write. And then, in the editing process, you'll eventually get to that tone that works.
Sheila or Elena, do either of you have any questions for TJ?
TJ, great presentation, and I really liked your article. And to see your background and how you sort of used that background to write this was very interesting. But I had one question for you, is when we look at qualitative methods on how we write, right? Narrative is one. And then there is case studies, right? You can write it as a case study. And then the way sort of you have bridged both of these, right? It's sort of a narrative, but your writing is also like a case study. So do you think this kind of new method of writing is going to become more popular, coming from the academic point of view? Because in the academic world, we write one way, and that's the only way we write. And that is what our peers recognize as something valuable. But I'm seeing that your methods of writing, what's in the field, is sort of a mixture between multiple ways of looking at qualitative data. I mean, I'm looking at it from a data perspective. So you're looking at qualitative data as what podcasts can do as a form of teaching and development, right? So.
Yeah, no, I love what you just said, not because it was congratulations to me, but but thank you for being very kind. But I think it's actually the wave of how things are going. I mean, all we have to do is look at the trends in journal publications and see their survival rates or death rates, pick your term. And then you look at these people who are total hybrids of that. And I mean, you could go across any number of scientific disciplines and see people who've started a blog and they're sharing exactly what you just said, sort of this bridge between, here's all the technical things, here's all the data, and here's how you make sense of it. And I think that's improved dramatically in the last, 30 years, thanks to blogging, but also thanks to just people like opening the door to say, do we really have to be so stuffy? Do we have to give it in a way that's just so many details that people get lost in it and they're not interested? Or can we actually have a story about this data? And I'll say I'm a closet data junkie. Like I do tons of stuff with data reporting tools. I'm not necessarily great or smart at it. I just love data. So I wind up getting involved in seeing lots of research reports when it's just the data level. And it's always these people who've done exactly what you said and kind of found a way to bridge both. And they tell that story through data. And maybe it's because the data is more accessible now. You don't just have this giant, I mean, I know they're not spreadsheets specifically. Some of the data is coming out of other, programs, but I think I think we will see more of it. And I mean, I think just the trend in the closure of lots of technical and academic publications sort of tells that story. People are not reading it because it's not compelling enough or the audience is too small. And does that mean there's not good information coming out of those places? No, it just means that the story hasn't been compelling enough. So I think there is actually a whole movement of people who are in this sort of data journalism, data reporting sorts of approaches. And, I'm thinking of like City Lab and there's a Pew Research, all these sorts of places that are definitely doing hardcore number crunching and then telling a good story out of it. I don't know if that captures what you were going towards, but I hope
No,
so.
it does. And I was thinking of something else too. That I had like a couple of questions as I was listening to you and reading at the same time, which is not a good thing to do. But did you find any themes, like common themes? And maybe as your next steps, were you thinking of grounding those themes in some kind of coding, right? Of coding of some common themes as your end, and then build it around some theories that are emerging right now in what we call as student-centered projects, right?
I think that at least one of the reviewers was nudging us in that direction to say there's some data here that I don't see pulled out well. So I think that's I guess the short answer is yes.
Mm-hmm.
The student, how did you say it? Student project outcomes or student, say that
Yeah,
again.
we call that as the student engagement through community building, right? So students are not individually engaging, but they're engaging through community building.
Okay.
And that's what I think podcasts have an ability to do, especially in the ATE world, right? Because the ATE world is not just student in the classroom, it's not just a faculty, it is also the community, the industry, the users, and all of that, and the practitioners who have retired from that industry, who want to act as subject matter experts. So it's this very large network of users, right? If you think of it that way. And students
Right.
do enjoy engaging with that community. So maybe podcasts such as these have some common themes. I'm thinking, I haven't researched on this. I listen to a lot of podcasts for my own. I'm a podcast junkie, but I listen because it keeps me interested in many different topics that I don't have the time or the bandwidth to read. But I'm thinking this: you're going in a direction. You could establish some themes, code those themes, and build what we call as a very simple word cloud. I'm just making it very simple.
Oh, yeah.
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 What do students want, and what does the community want? And then we can fill that in.
No, I think Peter's probably loving this input as well. This feedback is great because I think it affects, one, the podcast overall. Two, I did a word cloud. Now that you say that, I did a word cloud. I don't remember if I did it for this specifically, Peter, if I just did it for some of the other data that we were pulling. But that's a great thought, to codify some of those themes and to see which ones start to resonate over time, to sort of track them more intentionally. I think that's actually, it's possible through some of the ways we tag things. So it might be quite doable to say these are the 5 major themes we're approaching this year, and we want to see if those actually resonate with the community, and how so. I'm wondering how. I mean, my mind goes to sort of data analytics and how do you track it? How do you codify that? I'm sure Peter actually can write a script that will follow everybody's motions. But
You could actually do a data visualization, right? Of some
yeah,
kind, like some data points. And you can see that as the students are getting engaged in this podcast, the cloud moves, right? So the
yeah,
cloud is moving between the various themes. And I think data visualization has this ability to do it. Not that I know to do it. Some of my students know how to do an R script and pull data,
right.
but maybe there is a way to do that. And you say, when the student listens to this podcast, or the community of users listen the first time, this is where the code, this is the theme they're sitting with. But then they listen again, the theme moves.
Huh. That's a really interesting idea. I wonder if we could do that with Like you'd have to set up sort of a pilot group, right? You'd have to have a control
Yes.
group and a not control group to say, I want you to listen to it a second time.
Yes.
And I will say for the record that and this is no diss, I have listened to more podcasts thanks to Peter and Janet's work, but I hardly ever listen to podcasts because I find myself going, come on already. I'm listening to like 2x speed. The person sounds like Mickey Mouse. I'm like, come on, dude, I don't need to hear all that. Just get to the point, right? And so then I'm like just reading the abstract. Dude, I can read faster than you can speak. And I'm just like, okay, great. I wanted that one bullet point. I want that one talking point. So interestingly, I think you can actually take some of the transcripts and find some of those themes that are going to be useful to track because of what happens over the cross of 20 transcripts. And we could run those through some tools to find if we're actually unintentionally creating themes. Peter, that's kind of an interesting thought to see if those are what are emerging and continue to be popular. I like your point, Sheila.
But thank you. This has been very interesting.
Sheila, do you have any other questions for TJ or for Janet too, who's done an enormous amount of work on the podcast?
I can imagine. This was something I would love to do when I'm totally retired. I have to say the word
It's a lot
totally
more
retired.
fun as a job. It's a lot more fun as a job. Trust me. I love it. It's exciting to hear people's stories and to know that there are other people listening who are in a place where they think they're all alone and they can't see a way through to realize their goal. And then to hear somebody who has been successful in realizing their goal is really my winning point on all of this as we move forward. It never gets boring because people are coming in from all walks of life, from all different situations, and it's very exciting to hear. So I'm privileged to be a part of that.
And they're from all over the world, which was a mind-boggling data point. We didn't get to expand on it a lot because I don't know that we have enough data on that front. But the fact that there's a whole cohort of people from Germany who listen in, to every podcast, it's like, well, that's kind of interesting. Who is that person, right? How did they get here? Are they a transplant? Are they actually just a colleague of Peter's? What is it that drives a group of people to chime in, or not chime in, to tune in every time there's a podcast from some other place, which is fairly, it's to your point, Janet. I think that people are looking for motivation or inspiration or an idea of how could they also do this. And so Talking Technicians brings those people, gives it to them wherever they are, asynchronously, whatever it works for them. So I love the concept of podcasts, and I do have a few, and people send them to me all the time to listen to, but I find out that I just read the transcript, or I actually use one of those transcription services and I upload the audio and I let it just rip it all out into the transcript if they don't give me one. And then I'm like, okay, I'll just read this. And everybody's like, you're defeating the purpose. And I'm like, yeah, I know, but it takes too long.
Well, TJ, thank you so much for coming on today and talking with us on the JAT Writers Studio. And I'm looking forward to continuing to read everything that you put out there.
Thanks, Peter. It was fantastic to be here. Thanks for the questions, Sheila, and the conversation and all the great ideas. This is kind of cool.